Welcome to How to Write a Book in 90 Days. I'm Kamala Devi, and this is actually part two of a sort of an introduction to this course. I've been teaching this, it's really more of a channeling course than writing, but I've been doing it off and on for the last decade. And so I have dozens of authors who've completed their full first drafts in 90 days. And then for those of you that don't know, I have a handful of books on my own, many of which were channeled. And I've got a new one that's coming out, although it's kind of delayed due to the current crisis, but it will be coming out in September this year. That's 52 Fridays. I'm very excited. So I want in this class to roll our sleeves up and get kind of down and dirty, because in the last class I talked a lot about the burning why, the passion for why we write this book, which is I think very much the first ingredient. And if you talk to any writing coach, they'll say this is where we start. This is the inception, of the creativity. And then all the different writing coaches tend to say, you got a huge project, right? Like it's an elephant. Writing a book takes many years. In fact, 52 Fridays took 5 years to write, and then 3 with the delays to publish, so it's a long game. And so when you have an enormous project, they'll tell you, break it down. But then we have a whole bunch of controversy or diversity in how coaches actually break it down. Like, what are the chunks? And sometimes it's oversimplified. The example I give is Brian Tracy, who's an amazing author, coach, writing coach as well. But he'll say, oh, writing a book, it's simple. It's 4 steps. It's just, your purpose, which is what we talked about in the last class, knowing why. And then all you have to do is you have to have your process. And then there's the POW, which is the action. I'm like, okay, you might feel like a kindergartner hearing that. And it's like, give me, some real steps. So it's kind of arbitrary how many steps. Like, one could say there's 101 steps to writing a book, or there's 3 steps. But I wanted to share what's really valuable to you, whether or not you take my course on channeling a book. I want to talk about, like, every book, whether it's fiction or nonfiction, has to go through, the process of first research, and I want to say that up front because it's not something that's covered in this course. I highly recommend you choose a book and a topic upon which you are a natural authority, that because of your life experience, you have a unique perspective on it, you have something to offer to the world, and you have an expertise. And that doesn't mean you aren't going to research. You still very much want to have relevant information that's beyond the scope of what you know naturally, and that includes even fiction. If you're not believable, you'll lose your readers. But we talked about this a little bit before. I don't want you to spend 90 days researching, and we all can. So the way that I'm going to suggest you do your research is, once you have your book topic, many of you did, we had a little icebreaker in the beginning and kind of have a sense of what you are writing. Imagine where that book would go in a bookstore. Now, it's kind of an interesting time, because the first assignment might be go to a bookstore, feel the stacks, look at where it would be filed, and you might do that virtually as well, which is scrolling on Amazon and really seeing, and I don't like to think so much of it as competition as allies. What are the books that are allies to your own book? Or what are the books that would be cuddling your book on the bookshelf? And and that, you're reading the books that are relevant to your book is valuable. Chances are, if you're like, okay, I'm ready to write a book, you've probably through your life already read those books. So I'm going to ask you to actually set your research, most of it aside for this period of time, and make notes where you can come back to it. And then what'll happen is you can start creating the writing environment. And that environment has a couple of, pieces to it. Like one is your space itself. Like I'm sitting at a big, exciting writing desk, which I just got for the purpose of my next book. But what are the things that inspires you? Like what art do you want on the walls, or where do you want to be looking? And some people are super social. So it's like, can't write here at home. You have to go to coffee shops, or write with a writing buddy. And so your writing environment is more than the physical space and tools. It also includes like social support, because part of your environment is your friends and family know that you're going to be doing this deep dive. And if they don't, they'll be tempting you to do movies or tempting you to do, to be distracting yourself in ways that aren't productive to your, true purpose. And so you want to get social support, not just from your immediate circle, but perhaps even putting it out into the world. And this is, I'm a huge advocate of making a radical declaration that you're writing this book, because it's like telling the universe, like this is what's happening. And then all the cooperative components can come in to support your journey. So the ingredient that we know professional writers have and amateurs don't is deadline. So most writers, if you're a professional writer and you've got an editor or an agent, that they will have deadlines, or at least, windows of when they need to hear back from you. And a lot of people think, oh, if I don't have that, I'll do it on my own time, or I'll write it, when I can, or in between, this project or that project. And this is genuinely why people fail to fail to complete. And so this course that I'm offering not only creates a deadline, the 90 days, but the peers, we work together and we become, in essence, like agents or like editors for each other, just by holding each other accountable. But the deadline, although I might say 90 days, it's kind of different for different people. Different genres have different sizes of books, because the deadline isn't just, okay, I need to finish the book by July 15th. I think it's June 15th is our collective deadline. Is that right, Michael? And yeah, so it's how many pages do you need to write per day? So what you're really looking for is a daily goal, whether it's pages or hours, but you want to get in the rhythm. And the way to know what your deadlines are, the way to set those deadlines, it's not arbitrary. It's actually kind of like a growth curve. As a writer, you write for a certain amount of hours, you see how much progress you make. Once you start tracking your progress and you're actually growing, because you'll learn to write faster or better or tighter. And as you track your progress, then you can make realistic estimations of, if I have a 300-page book and I'm putting 10 hours in per week, then I should complete my rough draft by this time. And although, a lot of people are just like, I just want to flow and I don't want to deal with the math. What happens when we start actually quantifying our work is it gamifies. It sends a message to you that your time is valuable. It actually helps with the increased improvement of output, so that your time is leveraged. It's best spent. So, these writing deadlines, although they may shift and flex depending on, your goal itself changing, they're so sacred. It's such a sacred contract with you and the manifest. It's like, hey, I'm taking this amorphous, inspiring, shamanic ideal realm and putting it into the 3D world. And the threshold through which we enter the 3D world is actually deadline. It's actually what's getting produced by when. And so it's that common wisdom of a deadline's what changes a dream, into an actual goal. So we play a lot with the sacred kind of alchemy of tracking our progress. And so in that process, you have to have already determined, what size your book is. And sometimes you want to, plan it out and map it out and say, what are the, how many chapters, how many pages per chapter? And the decision to that is usually answered by what kind of genre, what kind of book that you're writing. So there's a lot of this is all in the category of pre-writing, and it's preparing and planning. So, when I simplify the chunking down, I'll say there's pre-writing, there's writing, and there's rewriting. And then after that, it's publishing and marketing your book. But this pre-writing phase, when we do a 90-day course, we're going to really spend the whole first month in this pre-writing, and it's detailed outlining. Even if we want to, open to this grand mystery of a channel, the outline creates the riverbanks, for the creative flow. And so in the outline, what you want to do is, take this wild brainstorm. Many of you who were on part 1 of the call have already been brainstorming, and I'll give you more when we start the course, more tools on how to even expand that brainstorm. But you want to take the brainstorm and you want to start to organize the points in the order that you want to cover them. And so, you'll notice in a brainstorm that there's kind of groupings, there's clusters, there's ideas that kind of hang together. And this is even true if you're plotting your story. I know Dave asked at the beginning about, fiction. And a big fun part about fiction is you start to ask yourself questions about these characters. Who are they and what motivates them and what are they going to do? And yes, you're plotting and you're planning, and there will be space for you to be surprised as these characters, grow their own flesh and bones and start making their own decisions, and they will surprise you. But they'll surprise you more and more consistently to the degree that you've premeditated, what they would do and where their plot is taking them and what their character arc is and how their relationships will unfold. And so you want to play with, all of these story elements. And so the outline actually comes out to be like a bullet point. Like you really get into some bullet points. And in nonfiction, that would include like case studies and infographics, and you might have different tables and images, and you just want to outline all of that together into what looks like a rough table of contents. So just to back up on the fiction, it sounds like this is a group of mostly nonfiction writers, but I will say that there's some really fun parallels, because even when you're doing nonfiction and you're like doing a how-to, or you're doing your own true stories, because nonfiction involves personal narrative, you will find that we want to learn from storytelling skills, and that kind of transcends whether it's true or not true. Storytelling is one of the deepest drivers in human culture. And I want you to contemplate this for a moment, because as a shaman, I marvel on shamanic storytelling as a thread that really creates culture. So, before we had, our iPhones, before we had books, before we had, libraries, what we had was people, sitting around a fire and sharing. And those shares are actually like important pieces about our ancestors or about where, there are dangerous, poisonous plants, or, it's basically the oral history is what kept our culture surviving. And so I bring us back, kind of time traveling back, to get in touch with the primal instinct to tell story, and to tell it in a way that's compelling and memorable, because the survival of your tribe depends on it. And I tell you that now because it's not only embedded in your genes and your DNA, like the desire to share your worldview, or these are teachings that helped me thrive, and the world needs those teachings. That impulse is still there, but we want to translate it now to to modern technology, using all the best of what we know how to do in order to make the book most marketable, and to leverage our message. So as we design that good storytelling into the outlining, then what we've got to do is start the actual writing. Before that, I'm gonna plant a seed here. This is the magic bean, the Jack and the Beanstalk magic bean, that I won't be covering in this, preview course. But in the full course, I use a tool called blueprinting. So it's taking an outline and actually turning it into like an architectural blueprint. That blueprint will be the first few weeks of our course. But the reason I'm mentioning it now, because the difference between just outlining and writing is it's like this blueprint actually makes writing so much easier. And what I think is relevant for you to know is there's a way in which an outline is just like a list with bullet points, and then a blueprint all of a sudden has 3 dimensions to it. And that blueprint also has embedded in it some of the writing tools and skills that you'll have to learn as a writer, which is like your own voice, and how to do syntax and word selection for most impact. And so it's got a lot of the actual like good writing in it, which is an important piece, because a lot of people these days say, what makes a bestseller? A bestseller is a book that sells a lot. And most people think, oh, it just means you have a good marketing engine. The truth is, books sell well when they're well written. Because if you read a well-written book, you tell your friends, and then it gets picked up and it gets reviewed. And so we want to make sure that the book is well written, and that happens, the seed of that happens in the blueprinting process. So I'll just plant that seed and move on to the actual writing. So we're transitioning into the writing chunk. I want to pause here because I want to see, I'll do 3 segments on this call: pre-writing, writing, and rewriting. I want to see if there's any questions that you have as an author about the pre-writing process. That would be great. So I've got Dave. Do we have any other questions on pre-writing? Okay. What's on your mind, Dave?
All right, go ahead.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I've written 5 how-to books, but I haven't gone into the adventure quest, and I certainly have some books on how to do some of that. It's not easy. So in the pre-planning, do you address some of the aspects for writing stories? Because of course, as you said, it's good for nonfiction or fiction.
Yeah. So plot elements, I mean, one of the most simplified ways to talk about writing stories is to say you take your main character, and sometimes people say, oh, but I have an ensemble. Great, it still applies. You've got your main character, and you want to know what motivates this main character, because what you're going to do is you're going to put them in a dire situation. And then once that character is in a dire situation, you're going to throw every possible challenge at them, to where you as a writer, you are going to go like, oh, it's painful because I love this person and I'm making them suffer. But the truth is the more conflict that there is, and it's like the joke is, you take your main character, you put him up a tree, and you start throwing stones at them. Like, you want them to genuinely be challenged so that they can learn new skills, and they can find the inner resources or the outer resources, their allies or friends, or to overcome an obstacle that feels absolutely hopeless.
Got it. I've already been through that, and I've got many.
Yes.
So, yeah.
So this is the nature of good storytelling. And what the pre-planning process looks like is pre-planning is asking yourself, okay, so here's the story. You get it in a sentence. Then you ask yourself who, what, when, where, why, about all the characters, about all the interactions, about everything that happens, until you keep flushing it out. You keep asking questions until you're like, wow, now I've really got, a juicy story that you want to be interested by, you want to be following. And because
me being interested, or the readers?
So this is the thing. If the story doesn't fucking fascinate you, you're going to lose your readers. You.
Oh, okay. So it has to. Okay, got it.
You have to be like, this is a story that I'm in. I'm waking up. I can't wait to write it because I'm fascinated by it. I mean, really, the minute any of us starts getting bored as a writer, that's the minute in which we're going to lose our readers. They're just going to set the book down and pick up YouTube. Right? And these days we have higher and higher standards, lower and lower attention spans. So you want to really, be as compelling as possible.
Got it. Thank you.
Great.
That was just brilliant, your response.
Okay, great. So unless there's another pre-writing question, it looks like Jonathan has one.
Yeah. You were talking before about ideas that kind of live together.
Mm-hmm.
That like feed off each other,
Mm-hmm.
and then you put them in chunks. I wonder if you can elaborate on that.
Happy to. So when you start brainstorming, and a mind map is a perfect visual. So you'll have like even, okay, so we'll say you're making a mind map around, in your case, it's unidenticals about what aspect of sexuality? Is it youth?
Well, it's about a pair of identical twins, a boy and a girl, and they're both trying to
during their coming of age, like they're figuring out sexuality.
Yeah, exactly. Great. And they both have different identical challenges, and they need to find a way to deal with them in different ways.
Okay, beautiful. So as you're brainstorming this, you're going to say, okay, well, what are the different challenges? What are the different ways they handle them? What are the, what does puberty look like for this twin? What does puberty look like here? And then as you start saying, okay, well, what's the conversations they're having with their parents? How about with their friends? And you start putting all those different ideas out, you'll say, these ideas kind of go together, or I could cover this in this way. And, so it's like you put it all out on the table, you kind of like make a messy palette, and then you start drawing connections and shaping it a little bit. So that's the process, is that once you see it all, then you can say, oh, okay, I can cover this here and I can put these two things together in there. And sometimes it's real obvious, but sometimes it takes like a kind of explosion. You have to untangle things in order to rebraid them elegantly into an order that would take the reader on a journey. Does that make sense? Okay,
Yes,
so
thank you.
great. Linda's got a final question. This will be the final question on pre-writing. Good to see you.
Hi. Yeah, since mine's more of a how-to, it's working with emotions. Can you give me some examples of the type of questions that in creating my outline to help me? I mean, I can think of some such as, okay, what is the benefits it produces? What is the steps for them to do that? What do they need to understand?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the biggest questions we want to ask ourselves, fiction or nonfiction, is what is the problem we're trying to solve? You know, what are the challenges? And there's no end to the brainstorming on this. We really want to look at, you know, if a how-to book doesn't have enough conflict, we're going to get bored. And this is, you know, Michael's writing about peace, and it's like, great. We all want peace, but nobody wants to read a boring book about peace. It's like we need to know what we need to overcome to get it. And so, you know, especially around emotions, you may want to untangle the various emotions and say, okay, let's really look at how, you know, what are the components around anger separate from, you know, dealing with grief, which is totally different than fear, and, you know, kind of going into
This one's about judgment.
yeah, excellent, judgment. And then shame, or the second dart of the, what if you don't want to feel what you're feeling? And, you know, just really continue to explore everything that you think you know, and then ask yourself, what's underneath that? What's next? Good.
So like, what do they need to understand that?
Excellent.
Okay,
And I
thanks.
have, in my pre-writing section, I have a whole series of questions that I offer you in order to help you excavate even more.
Can I ask another question? Are we going to, as being part of the paid course and stuff, do we meet weekly?
Everybody's going to be listening to weekly, like audio downloads of this is what this week is about. But we're, as a group on Zoom, it will be up to every other week. So, you know, we're going to not be, you'll have weekly accountability partners, you'll have weekly work to do, but as a group, we're going to meet more occasionally than that.
Okay.
Yeah. So in other words, there's a self-paced aspect to it so that you can, get the most at the pace that you're moving.
Yeah, I'm needing the accountability part with the deadlines.
Yeah. And you'll have accountability, plenty of accountability in it.
Yeah, it's like, oh.
Great. Okay, good. So we're going to go back into writing now. And you can hear the influx in my voice because I'm very excited about this. Okay, I've done all this work. Now the white hot inspiration. This is actually where the channeling happens, because you've in the right brain. No, sorry. First, it's left brain. It's more of a calculated, you know, with the deadlines, with the planning, organizing, and then you swap over. And that's why I really like to make a big break where I've done all the blueprinting. I get to open a channel to the, you know, the creative source, to dream time, to inspiration. And that's when we start to really flow. But what it requires is that we reduce distractions. So this is, you know, the death of every writer, is all the different ways our attention is being pulled. You know, we have to learn to turn off the phone and the internet, to stalk our procrastination habits. We have to learn, you know, how writing block, when it comes up, how are we going to get through it so we can get back into the flow? There's lots of tools and techniques around, calling your accountability buddy or going for a walk, or, I like to break the writing down into smaller chunks. But this reducing distractions is a really big part of just creating the environment for this channel to be open. And channeling is like a muscle. Like, it's like in the beginning, you're like, ooh, I had a brilliant idea and I wrote it down. It's on a napkin. It's like, great. Now give me 10 napkins, and then 20. And then pretty soon it's like the book is just pouring through. But it has to be, built on successes. So as you're writing, in the writing phase, you're going to hit this point called medias res, which actually is like you're in the middle. And this middle place, it's like also called the marathon in the middle. And it's like easy to get, like, okay, the new relationship energy, the passion, the honeymoon is over, and now I still have all of this writing to do. And we've got tools and tips to keep you really deeply engaged, to keep you in love. Writing is like a marriage. And so you want to recommit and redevote yourself to the book again and again, and keep it passionate, keep it hot, keep it moving, which is why I think, this is what makes me a really good writing coach, is the fact that I'm also, a Tantra teacher and a wife of, 18 years, that, I feel like I'm a perpetual lover, and I want to give you those tools and tips of like how to keep it hot. So, as you're writing and you move through the marathon in the middle, you also want to have, in each chapter, and not even each chapter, you could even say each paragraph, but the idea is you want to have a compelling first sentence. So this is a microcosm and a macrocosm. At the microcosm, the very first sentence of your book, you want to grab the reader and pull them in, grab them by the collar and just pull them into the book. And yet you also want to be doing that. A lot of writers put way too much attention on, it was a dark and stormy night. No, it was a balmy night. No, it was, it's not, the first sentence is important, but so is the first paragraph. It doesn't make or break your book as much as like, are people compelled? But then the beginning of each paragraph, you want to be interesting. The beginning of each chapter, you want to be compelling. Also, there's transitions. There's how to transition between ideas, or even time transitions in fiction. There's also wrapping up and concluding, because it's really important to both bait the reader and say, hey, in the next chapter, you're going to learn this, or even to foreshadow what's happening for your character. And then you take them through the journey, and at the end, you kind of look back and you have to review some. And that review can be really, really powerful for the reader to kind of see where they've come and to grow. So, first sentences can be, poetic or dramatic or surprising or philosophical. Like, there's different flavors to it depending on what's being called for in that moment. But ultimately you want that first sentence to be like authentic to what it is that you're wanting to, what your message is. So throughout this whole writing process, you want to give yourself permission to write a very shitty first draft. So it's super ironic, because here I'm like, you have to craft the sentence that's going to, seduce the reader. And then at the same time, you have to be totally surrendered to being a channel and getting that. What will clog your channel more than anything else is perfectionism. You have to throw perfectionism out the window and allow yourself to be messy, to be wrong, to be redundant. It's like, this is part of white hot writing. You're in the flow. You can't be micromanaging and over editing, and because that's actually what will clog the channel, and it will put you into writer's block. So in order to and the other thing that people don't realize when they're writing their first book, many of you have read hundreds of books, if not more, in your lifetime. So you have an idea of a book, but really all you've seen is the final draft. Every book you've ever read is the final draft. So you have no concept that that it probably took them 10 drafts to get there. The first draft was shitty. It was messy. It was redundant and crunchy. And so we compare ourselves to these published authors and we think, oh no, I need to go back and rewrite and it has to sound this way. And no, it doesn't. A lot of those, the good story, the story I like is George Lucas. His, I think I told you the punchline already, but Julia Cameron, who wrote The Artist Way, has a creativity course, and she showed her students a student film, and they were like, that was crap, that was terrible, what a terrible film. And then afterwards she said that was George Lucas's first film. And the point being that all greatness kind of comes from messy, from you have to be willing to be a beginner. So once you have your shitty first draft, then we can get into the rewriting process. And looking at the time, I'm going to briefly open it up and see if anyone has any questions about the writing process. I see Dave. Anyone else? Okay, great. Dave.
Yeah, so 10 hours per week. How is this done in 3 months at 10 hours per week to complete something, even a first draft?
Yeah, so that is the alchemy of this blueprinting process. It's like I'm really committed to offering a shortcut, offering technology that supports people in writing on purpose, and writing, what they want to say. And it's, like I said, going to be a shitty first draft, but it's absolutely possible. If you say, I want to write a 500-page book, you're going to have to probably put more than, 10 hours in. 10 hours is a minimum. If you're not putting in 10 hours a week, I don't consider you writing a book. I think you're.
I thought you said your rule, from what I read, was you have to promise to do no more than 10 hours per week. Maybe I missed something.
No, it's you did miss something, and
Okay.
and definitely let me know. It's no less than 10 hours a week.
Okay. Yeah, I think it was in the ad copy of this, because that's a huge distinction and difference.
Oh, huge distinction. Yeah.
Huge.
So I will review that, but and I'm not beyond putting typos out there. Trust me. So I'll eat that if that's the case. But it has been very possible. I mean, you can talk to many of my writers who did it in less than 10 hours a week. And I tell them, I need you to commit to at least 10 hours. But some of them, so basically it's going to depend on your own writing and your speed. And if you say, I have 10 hours a week and I want to write this book and it's 300 pages, I'd say no problem. Let's do it. If you can put the time in, we can do it. Okay. So any other questions about writing? Moving on to rewriting. Okay. So I
have a question, Kamala. It's Bella.
Oh, great, Bella. Glad you're back on.
Thank you. My question is, do you have any experience working with any type of dictation software like Dragon Speak or that sort of thing? I'm not real good with sitting in one place for a long period of time. So just wondering your thoughts on that.
Absolutely. I think for those of us that are public speakers or have the gift of gab, and it's like, oh, I think, I'm an external processor, then writing while, when I first started, I'll be honest, Dragon Speak was so rudimentary in its ability that I pushed people away from it. But these days, you could write a whole fucking book just talking to your text machine.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like dictation is amazing. And yes, I do have authors who've done it that way. And I've also had authors who've taken their, I know Dave Domshanu does, you know, has programs and courses, have taken their classes and sent them into somebody to transcribe them for them. And then they've just kind of changed them into books. Those processes are kind of exceptions to what I'm teaching, but totally one of the core principles of this work is to know yourself and be true to that, know what works for you. So if you have a flow with that, then I'd say absolutely, let's do it.
Okay.
Great.
All right. And whose name did you use? David who?
Oh, Dave Dontanu's on our class right here. He was the one.
Okay.
Yeah. So I was just saying that he was asking me earlier if this course was valuable for, you know, if you don't want to write a book, could he write his course curriculum or his next program? And although I have worked with graduate doctoral students who are like, I need to finish my dissertation, I have had them finish their dissertations in this course, but only because their dissertations were book-worthy material.
Okay.
So this is really about how to write a book. So,
okay.
Thank you,
Great.
Bella.
Thank you.
Okay, Linda, did you have a final question before I?
Yeah, I just want to, on what Bella's is there a certain Dragon Speak level, you know, version that you'd recommend or others?
Yeah, that's what having a peer group's for. Like, you guys can kind of crowdsource those ideas, but I'm not going to give technical.
Okay.
In fact, just so you know, my policy is I'm not a fan. I'm not. You know, some writing teachers will geek out about you need to use WordPress and you have to do Scrivener and you have to, and it's like, look, I really want people to find what works for them and to trust in the law of attraction around the tools that you need to write your book at this time will come to you. But I'm not advocating, all the different technologies because they're out there and no one answer works for everyone. Okay.
Thank people.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so we are going to dive in the last 15 minutes here to give some high-level notes on the writing stage itself. Now, rewriting, important distinction. Throughout the writing process, I'm going to ask you to have a separate kind of doc or space where you make notes about, I need to research this. Or if you're on a thread and then your book forks in different directions, which often happens, you'll be like, this is the direction I want to go and I want to cut all of this out. But instead of going back and cutting it out from what I've already written, I'm just going to make a note on and I call it a scraps document. On the scraps document, note to self, please go back and change everything. I had a book, 52 Fridays, right? I mentioned it took me 5 years to write. I had a character whose name was Sam. It changed to Ethan. Then it changed to Damien. But I'm like, okay, Damien's the answer. And I had to make a note, change Damien to Ethan, because even though it's seemingly simple as a search and replace, it's like who Damien became is different than who Ethan was. And that required a whole rewrite, but I'm not going to have you rewrite while you're writing. So you're making a doc, make with notes of the ways in which you want to change the book when you're done with your shitty first draft. So that'll allow you to keep moving, even if you're making mistakes along the way. And it doesn't break your momentum. So, Brian Tracy's one of my mentors, and he says to write feverishly, and so in that feverishly mode, you don't want to go into the part of your brain, back to the part of your brain that's right brain, that's thinking, that's technical, until you literally switch gears and you say, now I'm putting on my editor's cap and going into rewriting. It's a very different part of the brain. And those two parts of the brain will conflict, and you'll start to feel kind of schizophrenic. And by the way, this is the way I teach. This is the way that I work. This is what this writing course is. Now, there are many, many writing coaches who will tell you there's no possible way to write a book in 90 days. They will tell you that what they do is they wake up first thing in the morning and they rewrite everything that they wrote the day before, and then they go into writing what they're going to write. And that's beautiful. It's just a different writing process. And many of you may already have your own writing style, own writing process. And I'm asking you to enroll in this course if you're willing to do it differently, to be coachable, and to try this method for the next 90 days. After you learn this method, you can go back to whatever method you want. But I make a very separate distinction between writing and rewriting, because I find that it works the muscle of channeling. It allows you to create neural pathways in the brain that are inspired, that are, it's that feverish, white hot inspiration. So then I have, in the rewriting process, that cap has very different kind of questions where you're more critically assessing the syntax, the grammar, but it's not super, there's line editing, that's superficial stuff. But there's deeper questions about what would make this book even more compelling. Like, what would an editor be thinking as they read this book? Maybe you read the whole book through the lens of the reader. And I have some tools about how to rewrite the book in the fastest possible way, and not get mired in the, you read a sentence and you sit there and you go back and forth about the right word, which, William Faulkner is one of my deep early inspirations. And the legend of him is that he would stare out the window looking for the perfect word, and sometimes just like scream until he found the perfect word. There are lots of amazing artists who have their tormented practices. And I'm really committed to, in the How to Write a Book in 90 Days, to rewriting quickly, as opposed to, okay, you wrote it in 90 days and now it's going to take you much, much longer to rewrite. But the absolute truth is that it is so much easier to rewrite a book that's already written than one that's half finished or partial, or like when you have a body of work, to get your red pen out and you have the whole picture. Rewriting makes so much more sense than when you toil over a chapter or, a paragraph, because it's not in relative proportion to what you're doing. A lot of times people will rewrite, and they'll rewrite, and then later in the grand scope of something, they're like, oh, I have to cut that whole section anyway, because it doesn't make sense in this theme of the new book. So I do make big discernment around what's to stay in the book and what's to be cut. And the truth is much of the shitty first draft does get cut, but you want to have clear criteria by which what serves, the reader, what serves the story, what serves the message. So I'm just reviewing my notes to see, I'm not going to get deep into like how to handle conflict and developing characters and climax. Many of those things are covered in the full book. I will say that when you finish your rough draft, you want to have a first reader. For Stephen King, this is his wife. For some people, it's like their best friend or their writing partner. Or I'm not offering to read everybody's drafts. What I'm asking is that you find somebody in your life to actually read the book and support you, so that it's outside of your own head. And it's like, okay, yes, it is a shitty first draft, but then you get some feedback about where to edit. And I don't trust one person. This might be my poly nature, but I request that people find 3 separate readers when the book is ready for a reader. You know, like there's a shitty first draft, and then there's a shaping. And then when it's ready for an outside reader, you find 3 separate, you can call them beta readers, but it's like first readers. Because when they give you feedback, if 2 of them tell you the same thing, then it's like, ooh, that there's collaboration. If all of them are telling you very different things, then you as an artist can say, I prefer this or that. If all of them tell you the same thing, there's something you definitely have to change. Like if they're like, I hate your main character, or I was lost on this part, or, you know, I'm really left with more questions about this. Whatever those themes are, so you take notes on whatever feedback they give you, and whatever those themes are, that's a good indication of your own blind spots. Because every writer is gonna, you know, you're not even gonna know what the blind spots are. Here's the trick. You know, we're writing from our personality, from our, you know, ideally we're channeling as close to the soul as we can, but the soul doesn't speak in language, you know, so what comes through language is really through the personality. And we have our own blind spots, that when a reader reads, they will tell you. And what's profound is that it's actually personal growth directed. It's feedback about your understanding of reality. So it cuts sometimes so close to the bone that it can be really hard to take any criticism, because it feels like I just put my heart forward and now you're saying this. But so much of what it means to be a writer is being willing to, and open to see into your shadow, to see into what you missed or where you could grow. And so this is where I feel that writing a book, you know, not only does it refine your deepest truths, but it also will help you grow, and in your relationship to reality. That dialogue from your feedback from your readers is so valuable. So then getting, you know, a trifecta of feedback, you can go into this deeper process of the craft, you know, which is where you're looking for redundancies or any leaps in logic, or you know, saying goodbye to irrelevant information. So it's really starting to craft. So if overall, you know, you're looking at, you know, at first it's just trying to channel the message, and then you're really kind of polishing and adding the artistry to it. And the artistry sometimes is like the dialogue and creating the scenes, and you know, and even how to be more engaging or more colorful or more poetic. And that a lot of that comes through in the rewriting stage. And then also in the rewriting is when you can start to think in terms of, you know, a forward to the book or acknowledgments. And I recommend people do their introduction to their book as a last stage. Once the book is created, you can better introduce it. So that can actually wait until the rewriting. And there's all kinds of other finishings, you know, like disclaimers and the author's bio and appendix, and, you know, those kinds of things come closer to the packaging and the publishing, which we're not going to cover in today's class, but that is warranted. I do have a whole class or 2 about publishing in the 90-day course. So that concludes today's teachings on writing, and I'm curious if rewriting. Curious if there's any questions that you have for where you're at in your art about rewriting.
I was more wondering about how long into the process is the rewriting done? You know, when are you recommending that?
Okay, yeah. So How to Write a Book in 90 Days is about how to write your manuscript in 90 days. It's the drafting, white hot writing of it. And during that 90 days, you're also listening to audios that teach you about the writing and rewriting. And because it's a self-paced course, I have a lot of people who go back and, many people, I've like published authors, like they finished their draft, they celebrated, they did it, and then they went back and they listened to and they did the rewriting, but that's outside the scope of the 90 days. I would suggest that you give yourself at least 90 days to finish your rough draft. There's no rewriting that comes before that.
Okay, somehow I was thinking 90 days, the book was done in final form, so.
I love what a miracle worker you think that I am.
Oh, no, I believe it's possible, and I thought you were doing that,
Yeah.
so I still think you'll do it anyway.
Thank you. All right, any other rewriting questions? Was that a question, Jonathan? Still can't hear you.
I was just wondering, in the full course, will you be getting into like character development and like storytelling and all that? If I'm writing fiction.
Yeah, I have some tips and tools on that for sure. I do talk about fiction, and that's something that in the full course, this is one of the benefits of doing it right now while we're in quarantine, is I have these, recordings for self-paced program. But during the quarantine, we're going to have these extra classes, whereas group classes. And if your questions aren't answered, let's talk about them in group. Yeah. Good. Okay, so this will be the final question from Corey.
Hey there. I am just wondering, when is the magic moment that you say, or how do you determine that moment where you say, okay, it's going to the first reader?
Yeah, so this is when you, after you finish the shitty first draft, you don't just hand it to somebody. Like, you have to be able to read through it yourself. And there's no way as an author to read through it without saying, oh, I needed to tweak this and that and this and that. So when you've gotten to a place where you can read through it and be like, yeah, that's good, I'm proud of this, and you can read through it without your own editor jumping in and rewriting it, then you've got a draft that's worthy of another reader. But if you're looking at it and you've got all these disclaimers, like if handing the manuscript over was like, but I want to tell you in chapter 3 it does this and that, and I need to disclaim this and that, you're not ready. You want to feel good about what you've written. You've done your own review, and then you can, with peace, say, all right, whatever feedback they give me, I'm willing to, receive. I know it can be better, but it needs other people's feedback to get better. Great question. Okay, so I'm going to pause. If you have more questions, you can send me a email or reach out with voicemail. I have about another week to be available to you. If you haven't seen part 1, please do. I'll put the link here as well. And then I'd really love to have if you feel inspired, if you feel aligned, I'd love to have you join us in about a week. The journey, right now we have 12 authors on board. I'd love to get more. It's just such a sweet time. It's like, because of the pandemic, because we're in this kind of cultural crisis, I think it's and the whole world, the message of the whole world is go within, feel more. What's happening inside. I encourage us to really, as writers, cultivate our voice, get our messages clear. The world needs, what we have to share more than ever. And that's why I'm offering this, like, genuinely as a public service. Like, I'm taking all the proceeds of the course and I'm donating them to No Kid Hungry. It just feels write to me to support, the starving children in this moment, as a declaration as a writer, that you're saying, hey, I'm investing $108 because I know that my writing is going to make a difference in the world. And so I'm asking for you to make a commitment to yourself and to the world. And it's with the deep knowing that not everybody who starts class will finish the class, and that's okay. But if you follow the teachings, you will write more than you've ever written in your life in the next 90 days, which is really exciting, because who you become as a result of doing that is a whole different person than who started the course. So I can't wait to see you blossom and to help you get your message out into the world. All right, namaste, blessings.
Where is the link going to be for the first part?
I'll send it to everyone. Yeah.
Thanks.
Okay. Yeah. Take care.